No matter what a person does to earn his living, many people in the community depend on him. And he in turn depends on many other people. People who work in factories, making goods for the stores to sell.
Also on Saturday mornings, I usually take an hour or so to go over the accounts and bills, figuring out ways to double stretch that check of mine to pay them. Upkeep on the house and car, electricity, gas, and all the rest.
Today we take a shiny bathroom, a full refrigerator, or a phone always in our pocket for granted. But if you turn back to America in the 1960s, you would see that for millions of poor families, all those conveniences were nothing but a distant dream. Poverty back then was present in every corner of the house, stamped on worn-out shoes, and lingering in every meal. And sometimes, just one tiny detail was enough to tell who had really grown up in a childhood of hardship. In this video, let's explore 25 signs that prove you grew up poor in 1960s America. And get ready, because some of these memories may leave you choked up and deeply nostalgic. 25. No bathroom in the house. Kids bathed only once or twice a week. Every time we step into a bathroom today, all it takes is a twist of the faucet, and hot water gushes out, steam fogging up the mirror. But in the 1960s, America, for millions of poor families, bathing was a struggle. A bathroom often meant nothing more than a zinc tub set down in the kitchen. A big pot of water was heated on a kerosene stove, its sharp smell filling the whole house. When the water boiled, parents scooped it carefully into the tub, just warm enough for a shivering child to step inside. No shower head, no bathtub, only the clanging of water hitting metal and a thin mist rising in the cold air. The 1960 U.S. Census recorded it clearly. 1 out of every 6 households did not have complete plumbing, meaning no hot and cold running water, no indoor bath, and no toilet. The reason was obvious. Installing pipes, a tub, and a water heater could swallow up months of a factory worker's wages, far beyond what most laboring families could manage. And it wasn't only in rural Appalachia. Even in northern industrial cities, where cars filled the streets and color television was starting to appear, plenty of people still recall the chill when their father called out, "It's your turn." In a small wooden house, windows fogged, winter winds creeping through the cracks, a child stood barefoot in a round metal tub. Water was poured 1 scoop at a time, just enough to wet the hair and rinse the body. Cheap soap, harsh smelling, had to be rubbed hard to lather. Afterward, the mother carried the dirty water out to the frozen yard. That is why many children back then bathed only once or twice a week, usually on Sunday, before church. For them, an indoor bathroom was a luxury they saw only in movies or heard about from better-off families. That zinc tub and aluminum pot of heated water became a symbol of a poor childhood. Hard to believe, but while America was proudly sending astronauts into space, down on Earth, some families still dreamed of pulling a hot water tap inside their home. Today, when we step into a gleaming tiled bathroom with a shower and water heater, we realize how what we call ordinary was once an impossible dream for countless poor families of the 1960s. And the zinc tub in the kitchen still lingers as a symbol of a time of deprivation that will never be forgotten. 24. Using an outhouse in the yard with fear. There is a memory many who grew up poor in 1960s America will never forget. That short yet endless walk from the back door to the wooden outhouse at the far end of the yard. At night, darkness covered everything. The wind howled, and the frozen ground crunched underfoot. Each step felt like a trial, both freezing and frightening. The outhouse was just a hastily built wooden shed, roof leaking, walls with gaps, floorboards creaking. Inside, there was no light, only a faint moonbeam through the cracks. The damp smell mixed with the acrid stench from the pit made children hold their breath. Some remember the sound of rats scurrying beneath their feet, or the haunting fear that snakes might slither through the darkness. Back then, going to the bathroom was not a simple need, but a terrifying journey, especially on winter nights when the wind screamed outside. And now, just open a door, and even the smallest house has a clean bathroom, a porcelain toilet, running water, soft toilet paper, sometimes even heating and ventilation. All these conveniences have become so ordinary that few stop to think. Barely half a century ago, millions of Americans still dreamed of something so simple. 23. Running to the neighbor's house to use the phone. In those years, when the landline telephone had already become a modern symbol of the American middle class, millions of poor families still lived without any communication device at all. The article, Our Invisible Poor, published in The New Yorker in 1963, noted clearly that many working-class households could not afford the installation fee, let alone the monthly bill, which swallowed up a significant share of their meager income. For them, a telephone was not essential, but a luxury. So how did they keep in touch? If they needed to call a doctor, report urgent news, or contact an employer, they had to run to a neighbor's house to borrow the phone, or head to a public pay phone on the street corner. The clink of a dime dropping into the slot became a sound tied to an entire generation. Poor children still remember the feeling of standing shivering outside at the phone booth, gripping the heavy receiver, their voices echoing against the wind, while behind them a line of people waited patiently for their turn. A striking fact is that even in 1960, the percentage of households with a phone in poor regions like Appalachia was only about 43%. That meant more than half the community still depended entirely on public payphones. It was a reality in sharp contrast to the prosperous image of America being broadcast on color television. Now things are completely different. It is almost unimaginable for a family to have no phone at all. In a shirt pocket or a pair of jeans, everyone carries a smartphone that connects to the world in seconds. That contrast makes the memory of coins clinking into payphones all the more haunting, reminding us that conveniences we see as normal today were once the unreachable dream of poor families in the 1960s. 22. Parents bought a wool suit only once every 2 years. In the 1960s, in working-class neighborhoods like Chicago's South Side or the steel towns of Pittsburgh, the most familiar sight in poor families was the father's one and only wool suit. It was usually bought at low-cost stores like Sears Roebuck or Montgomery Ward for about $40 to $60, the equivalent of nearly half a month's wages for a factory worker. For families scraping together every cent for rent, food, and medicine, buying a suit was a major decision, sometimes delayed for as long as 2 years. That suit was typically made of thick, heavy fabric, dark gray or brown, stiff and uncomfortable. But once the father put it on, he was transformed. No longer just a man in greasy work clothes, he looked dignified and proper, ready to walk with his family into church on Sunday morning or attend a wedding in the local hall. Many children still recall the pride of holding their father's hand in that suit, seeing him seem taller than anyone else around. But that pride faded quickly. After the service or the celebration, the suit was carefully removed, folded, hung in a rickety wooden closet, and covered with an old cloth to keep off dust. There it would stay for months, waiting for the next occasion, perhaps a somber funeral in a Detroit cemetery, or a holy day at the parish church. Today, Walking through any shopping mall, it takes only a few minutes to buy a cheap suit. The contrast is sharp. The one suit, carefully saved for over 2 years, once stood as a symbol of effort and self-respect in poor American families of the 1960s. It was not just clothing, but a piece of memory, filled with both pride and hardship. 21. The whole family crowded into one bed. In many poor American families of the 1960s, it was completely normal for 3 or 4 children to sleep together in one small bed. Wooden houses in Appalachia or cramped apartments in the South Bronx often had only 1 or 2 bedrooms for large families. A sagging twin bed became the mandatory gathering place for the kids. The mattress was sunken in the middle, the springs squeaked, and the sheets were thin and patched with wear. The reason was income and cost of living. In 1965, the average factory worker's annual salary was only about $2,500 to $3,000, while a new bed and mattress could cost dozens or even hundreds of dollars, far beyond families who had to put rent, medicine, and food first. So a single bed was used endlessly, passed down from older siblings to younger ones, and never replaced unless it broke completely. The most vivid memory was winter nights. Just one thin blanket, 4 children tugging it back and forth. One lay sideways, another lengthwise, feet against heads, breathing down each other's necks. Sometimes, waking up in the middle of the night from the cold, they huddled close together for warmth. For poor families, this was free heating when the wind howled through the window cracks. What is interesting is that many who grew up this way now remember it with a strange warmth. In that crowded space, family bonds grew stronger. Today, most American children have their own rooms, their own beds, thick blankets, and soft spring mattresses. That contrast makes the memory of crowding together on an old bed, once seen as deprivation, into a special piece of nostalgia, a vivid reminder of a poor childhood in 1960s America. 20. Shoes patched with cardboard. Do you remember the rustling sound inside old shoes when walking in the rain? For many poor kids in 1960s America, that was the familiar sound of cardboard pieces, stuffed inside worn-out soles. When shoes split open, parents could not spare $10 or $15 for a new pair, the same amount as a whole week's groceries. The quick, cheap fix was to cut cardboard from milk cartons, cereal boxes, or shipping crates and slide it into the shoes to cover the holes. In rainy places like Seattle or in Detroit's snowy winters, the cardboard lasted only a day. By the time kids came home from school, it was soggy, sticking to their socks, and had to be replaced the next morning. Children who grew up poor still remember the sting of freezing feet as rain seeped through layer after layer of cardboard, each step sending a sharp chill. Yet they still went to school, still played ball on the dirt lot, treating it as normal life. In the memory of many Americans, cardboard in shoes became a symbol of a poor childhood. Some politicians who grew up in that era even recalled it as proof of their tough beginnings. More than 50 years later, just a few dollars at Walmart or any outlet store buys a brand new pair. Hard to believe that half a century ago, a scrap of cardboard, something we toss away, was once the shoe repair technology for an entire generation of poor families. And for many, that rustling sound in rain-soaked shoes still echoes as a reminder of a childhood marked by hardship, but also resilience. 19. Clothes patched and handed down from older siblings. Nothing recalls a poor childhood more than the click of a sewing needle under a dim yellow lamp. In rural southern states like Alabama or Mississippi, kids rarely had new clothes. Each winter brought out the oversized coat that once belonged to an older brother, sleeves dragging on the ground. Faded Levi's jeans weren't bought new. They were family heirlooms, passed from the oldest to the youngest. Yet that patchwork gave birth to a unique, poor man's fashion. Companies like Gold Medal Flour knew thrifty families reused flour sacks, so they printed cheerful designs on the fabric. Roses, daisies, polka dots. Mothers with skilled hands turned them into dresses for their daughters. Many little girls went to school in flour sack dresses, feeling both embarrassed and proud, knowing their mothers wanted them to look as nice as possible, even without money for new clothes from Sears. Memories of hand-me-downs were never just about clothing. They were lessons in endurance, in turning scarcity into creativity. Today, when American kids can change outfits every season, even every week, it is hard to imagine that only decades ago, a dress sewn from a flour sack could bring a child joy. For many, the stitches sewn by a mother's hands remain warmer than any brand new garment. 18. Icebox instead of refrigerator. If the zinc tub recalled the lack of comfort, the icebox was the clearest proof of a struggling kitchen in poor American homes. In Kentucky or Cleveland, Ohio, many families still relied on a small wooden box lined with tin, holding a 25 to 50-pound block of ice. Every few days, the iceman came knocking, metal tongs clanking, dropping the heavy block into the top compartment. At 25 to 50 cents a block, the cost added up quickly, sometimes equal to what could have bought 10 cans of Heinz beans. The problem was simple. Ice melted fast. Water dripped into the tray and sometimes spilled across the floor, making children slip. Meat and fish spoiled quickly, if not cooked the same day, forcing mothers to rush meals. That is why canned goods like Spam or Campbell's soup became a lifeline. No refrigeration needed, and they filled the pantry shelves. Meanwhile, middle-class families in the suburbs were already buying shiny General Electric or Frigidaire refrigerators for $200 to $300, far out of reach for a laborer making under $60 a week. Today, we open gleaming refrigerators with freezers stocked full of meat and produce drawers packed with fresh fruit and organic milk. Looking back, it is almost unthinkable that a family's meals in the 1960s could depend on a block of ice slowly melting inside a wobbly icebox. Even the sharp crack of ice splitting is a sound etched into memory for a whole generation. 17. Meals of cheap canned food and government powdered milk. The musty taste of USDA powdered milk still haunts many Americans who grew up poor in the 1960s. It came in brown cardboard boxes stamped in plain black letters. Non-fat dry milk, U.S. government property. Mixed with cold water, it was thin and chalky, nothing like real milk. Kids remember their mothers pouring it into glass bottles, setting it in the icebox, hoping it would taste better chilled. Alongside it came the infamous government cheese, brick-sized, bright orange, packed in cartons, stamped with black lettering. Hard to slice, and never melting smoothly, it still landed on millions of tables, sliced into Wonder Bread sandwiches, or stirred into poor man's macaroni and cheese. Cheap canned food filled the rest. Spam at 39 to 45 cents a can, Campbell's soup for 10 cents, or tiny tins of Vienna sausages. These pantry staples were bought in bulk, since they lasted through the icebox melt and saved families from going hungry. For poor children, meals were often painfully repetitive. A government cheese sandwich, a glass of powdered milk, maybe a can of Heinz beans. It stood in sharp contrast to TV ads of the day, showing middle-class families enjoying roast chicken, fresh salad, and cake. Now, supermarket aisles are lined with hundreds of cheeses, organic milk, and endless frozen dinners. Hard to believe that just half a century ago, an entire generation grew up on government cheese and powdered milk. Not tasty, but survival for millions. 16. Meat was a luxury. After the government cheese and powdered milk, the most obvious absence on the poor family's table was meat. In 1960 America, a pound of beef cost about 70 cents, while the minimum wage was only $1.25 an hour. For factory families in Detroit or miners in Appalachia, meat was a rare splurge. Daily meals centered around Idaho potatoes, dried pinto beans, and slices of Wonder Bread. When meat appeared, it was often scraps, cheap ground beef, or organ cuts like liver. The best pieces, chicken breast or drumsticks, were saved for the parents, while kids gnawed on wings, crispy skin, or bones boiled into broth. The fanciest dish was meatloaf, but it was usually stretched with breadcrumbs and eggs so the small amount of meat could feed the whole family. Today, at Walmart or Kroger, freezer cases are packed with affordable meat. Compared to those lean years, the sight of endless cuts makes clear how rare a single piece of meat once was. For a child in the 1960s, meat meant more than a taste. It was the reminder that poverty wasn't only about hunger, but also about craving flavors you rarely got to enjoy. 15. Only one book a year. Just as meat was scarce at the dinner table, food for the mind was scarce in poor households too. The New Yorker in 1963 recorded a bitter truth. Some families were so poor, they bought just one book in an entire year. In poor South Bronx apartments or tiny Arkansas towns, bookshelves stood bare. Children grew up with old newspapers like the New York Daily News, or yellowed copies of Life magazine passed down from neighbors. Those pages became treasures, smiling photos of President Kennedy, smoky images of the Vietnam War, or glossy ads for Frigidaire refrigerators their families could never afford. One child recalled reading a tattered almanac so many times they memorized every number and map. Now children have bright school libraries, brand new textbooks, and Kindles that download hundreds of titles in seconds. That contrast makes the memory of empty shelves even more painful. And when books were scarce, learning itself was harder, especially since the light in poor homes was dim and weak. 13. Studying under dim yellow light. And when books were few, light made studying even tougher. Picture this: a small kitchen in Cleveland, 1965, the whole family under a single 60-watt bulb. Its weak yellow glow lit the wobbly wooden table where kids did their math homework, while the singer's sewing machine clicked under their mother's foot. Outside, the winter wind rattled the windows, making their pencils shake. Many families couldn't even afford a new bulb when one burned out. They turned to kerosene lamps from Woolworth's for less than $1, their flickering light blurring the words on the page. Still, children bent over their books, straining their eyes in that tired yellow glow. It was a picture of poverty. No desk lamp, no study corner, just one dim light shared by schoolwork, sewing, and unpaid bills. Today's American children have private rooms, bright LED lamps, laptops, and Wi-Fi. The memory of that single weak bulb remains proof of a generation that studied and dreamed even when the world around them flickered in darkness. 13. Christmas gifts, wrapped in old newspaper or brown paper bags. And when color television began showing glamorous Christmas scenes with tall, sparkling trees and presents wrapped in shiny red and green paper, the reality was completely different for millions of poor families. For them, wrapping paper at Woolworth's, costing 25 to 50 cents a roll, was far too expensive, equal to a loaf of bread or several cans of Campbell's soup. So parents made do with what they had: the Sunday newspaper they had just finished reading, or a brown paper bag brought home from the A&P grocery store. Those wrappings had no glitter, only black and white print, the faint smell of ink, sometimes mixed with ads for appliances the family could never afford. And yet the children still waited with excitement. Under the warm glow of a cheap aluminum tree bought at Sears, they tore through the wrinkled newspaper to find a pair of socks that cost less than $1 at Kmart, a wool hat patiently knitted by their mother, or a few-cent bag of peppermint candy. For many, the most treasured gift might have been nothing more than a used Superman comic book, or a wooden toy truck their father had quickly built from scraps in the workshop. Small as they were, those moments of hearing their name called at the tree and holding a gift in their hands were enough to make them feel they belonged. Many Americans who grew up in those years still remember the crackle of the Chicago Tribune being ripped open, the ink that lingered on their fingers, and the flood of joy from clutching a new pair of socks to their chest. Christmas back then was simple, not lavish, but warm, in a way that shiny wrapping paper today can rarely bring back. 12. No car of their own. Can you imagine a childhood where every grocery trip felt like a journey? In the 1960s, America, middle-class families, were already buying shiny Chevrolet Impalas or Ford Galaxies for about $2,500. But for poor families in Pittsburgh or immigrant neighborhoods in Brooklyn, that price was close to a year's savings. That meant walking or waiting for the bus. Kids remember trudging miles to school in shoes patched with cardboard, through snow and slush. Shopping trips meant mothers begging a ride from neighbors, or fathers hauling heavy grocery bags by hand. The memory of standing shivering at a bus stop, breath puffing white in the cold, is etched into a generation's childhood. Today, even college students can buy a used car for a few $1,000s and drive anywhere. So here's the question. If you had to walk miles just to buy groceries, would you cherish the car key in your pocket more? 11. Summer vacations were too extravagant, and of course, without a car, summer vacations were out of reach. While classmates bragged about trips to Florida beaches or cross-country drives to California, poor families spent summers in local parks. A simple picnic with peanut butter sandwiches, a jug of lemonade, and kids running barefoot on the grass. One child in Ohio recalled their only vacation as an afternoon at the public pool, admission 25 cents, or long hot days helping their father pick cotton or apples for extra school money. And when teachers asked for an essay on what I did last summer, many could only imagine, because the truth felt too plain to write down. Now, with just a few clicks, families book flights to Disney World, hotels waiting with air conditioning and pools. Set against that luxury, memories of poor summers in the 1960s feel bittersweet. Childhood might have had only a patch of grass, but it taught us to treasure the simplest moments. 10. Not allowed to buy hot lunch at school. Think back to the school cafeteria. Trays filled with steaming hot food, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and a glass of fresh milk. Delicious for many kids, but for poor students in the 1960s, the 25 cents price tag for a hot lunch was out of reach. Instead, they carried peanut butter sandwiches on Wonder Bread, so dry they stuck in the throat. To drink, a glass bottle of diluted powdered milk, bitter, and reused over and over. Children of that era remember the envious stares at classmates eating cheesy pizza or chicken nuggets while they chewed their dry bread, forcing it down with a sip of water. Sometimes schools gave out free peanut butter sandwiches to kids with no money. They weren't tasty, but at least they filled an empty stomach. Today, everything has changed. School menus include tacos, salads, fresh fruit, even chocolate milk. But ask yourself, if you had grown up watching your friends eat hot meals while you gnawed on a dry sandwich, would you ever take your own cafeteria tray for granted? 9. Using funeral home fans instead of air conditioning. And when the school year ended, summer heat became another misery. Poor families never dreamed of air conditioning, which cost more than $300, nearly a month's wages for a laborer. Instead, they cooled off with paper fans handed out free at church. Printed on them were funeral home advertisements, somber images that became everyday items in living rooms. Some children still remember the acrid smell of sweat, the steady flap of paper fans echoing through sweltering afternoons in Mississippi. At night, windows were thrown open, but mosquitoes swarmed in, cicadas hummed, and the heat pressed down. Each faint breeze from a funeral home fan felt like a blessing, just enough to drift into sleep. Now, central air has become standard in American homes. With the press of a button, cool air fills the house. But ask yourself this: could we still appreciate a breeze if we had never spent a sticky summer night sweating, waving a fan with a funeral home ad printed across it? 8. Heating with oil stoves or coal burners in winter. If poor summers were remembered with funeral home fans, poor winters were remembered for biting cold. In the 1960s, America, central heating was found only in comfortable suburban homes, costing hundreds of dollars to install, far beyond a factory worker's paycheck. For poor families in Cleveland, Ohio, or miners in West Virginia, survival meant a smelly oil stove or a coal burner set in the middle of the living room. Every morning, the father lit the fire with old newspapers, the sharp smell of kerosene filling the house. Children rubbed their hands together, trying to capture the thin warmth from the flickering blue flame. The lucky ones had a worn quilt. The rest wrapped themselves in heavy smoke-scented coats. Wet clothes were hung near the stove to dry, soaking the house with the smell of fuel and damp cloth. The most vivid memory was gathering. The family huddled close, telling stories, reading newspapers, or simply listening to the wind rattle the windows. It wasn't comfort, it was survival. Today, Americans turn a thermostat, and warmth fills the home, steady and clean. But if you ever woke up shivering in a freezing room, reaching for heat from a smoky oil stove, you understand. The comfort we enjoy now was once the unreachable dream of a whole generation. 7. Bare living room, no fancy TV console. When the cold pressed in, the family's refuge was the living room. But in many poor 1960s homes, there was no fancy RCA or Zenith TV console like in Life magazine ads. Instead, the entertainment center was a small Philco or Emerson radio, humming with static. Evenings were spent gathered close, eyes fixed on the radio, listening to news, Johnny Cash songs, or Yankees baseball games. Many children didn't see television until the late 1960s, usually at a neighbor's house, watching The Ed Sullivan Show or Elvis on the screen. That flickering black and white glow became unforgettable because at home there was only a crackling voice from a tiny speaker. The contrast is bitter when compared to today's homes, where flat screens cover entire walls, streaming Netflix 24/7. The poor generation of the 1960s grew up with imagination, turning voices into pictures, sound into stories. That little radio, not a television, was the heart of the home. 6. Homemade toys instead of Barbie or G.I. Joe. If the living room lacked a TV, the play corner lacked Barbie or G.I. Joe, which cost $3 or $4 at Woolworths, too much for families living on food stamps. So imagination became the only tool for joy. An empty Coca-Cola can with bottle caps for wheels turned into a toy truck. Scraps of wood became a train set. Girls held rag dolls stuffed with old cloth, dressed in handmade scraps. For some, the only Christmas gift was a wooden truck their father carved, wheels cut from jar lids. It wasn't shiny, but it was a treasure cherished for years. Those toys were not poor in spirit. They trained creativity. Children built worlds, invented characters, made stories. In a society divided by wealth, they found joy in invention. Today's kids have Lego, Nintendo, iPads. But ask the 1960s generation, and many will smile at memories of canned trucks and rag dolls. Because those homemade toys built their childhood. Poor, maybe, but rich in love and imagination. 5. Tiny dinner table, not enough chairs. Have you ever eaten dinner sitting on a wooden crate instead of a chair? For poor families in the Bronx or coal towns of Kentucky in 1960, it was everyday life. The dinner table barely fit a pot of mashed potatoes, a dish of beans, and slices of white bread. Around it, a battle for seats played out every night. The oldest kids took the wobbly wooden chairs, while the youngest sat on a coal box or a stool hammered together with squeaky nails. Whoever came last had to stand and eat quickly. Meals were short, filled with the clink of spoons against chipped enamel bowls, mixed with laughter and squabbles over the last piece of bread. Today, families dine at spacious tables, cushioned chairs for everyone. But close your eyes, and you can still hear the echoes of that kitchen. A shaky table, chipped bowls, and a child grinning while sitting on a crate. Scarce in food, but rich in family love. 4. No washing machine, laundry by hand in the yard. The smell of cheap soap and the scrape of a washboard. Those were familiar sounds in many poor 1960s homes. Washing machines were sold at Sears for $150 to $200. But with factory wages at $60 a week, they were out of reach. So laundry was still done by hand, by mothers and children. A big metal tub sat in the yard, filled with freezing water. Clothes were soaked, then scrubbed until hands turned red and raw. In Ohio winters, ice formed on the water's surface, and clothes stiffened like wood within minutes on the line. Children helped wring out heavy jeans, rushing back inside to warm their purple fingers. Today's washers and dryers handle it all with ease. But if you've ever smelled cloth frozen solid on a line, or seen a mother's cracked hands from soap and cold, you know the convenience we take for granted was bought with sweat and patience from the generation before. 3. Children went to bed in coats to save on heating and electricity. Turn off the lights. Electricity is expensive. That warning rang out in millions of poor households in the 1960s. The average monthly electric bill was only $8 to $10, but with annual incomes around $3,000, it was enough to keep parents counting every bulb. Kids learned to switch off lights the moment they left a room, to keep the radio on low, to heat only one room in winter. In Detroit and Appalachia, bedrooms went unused. The whole family huddled by the oil stove. Children slept in coats, wrapped in thin blankets. Some families used hand-me-down quilts from church, but the cold still crept through wooden walls. The faint glow of a 60-watt bulb was the only light allowed to burn past an hour. Today, air conditioners hum all day, lights glow all night, and few think about the bill. But the poor of the 1960s learned a lasting lesson from bulbs and stoves. Every cent mattered, and every small comfort was worth treasuring. 2. Kids started working at a very young age. Do you remember how old you were when you first earned money? For poor kids in the 1960s America, that number was often 10, sometimes as young as 8. At dawn in Chicago or Detroit, children pedaled bicycles stacked with newspapers taller than themselves, tossing them onto porches. Pay was about $1.25 a week, but enough to help cover the electric bill or buy loaves of Wonder Bread. The work didn't stop there. Kids combed streets for empty Coca-Cola bottles or Budweiser cans, trading them for 2 cents each. What we now call recycling was survival then. Some babysat neighbors' children, earning a few more coins, never keeping a cent for themselves. All went to parents trying to make ends meet. Inky hands from newspapers, small shoulders bent under bags of bottles, the clinking glass with every bump in the road. Those were the realities of a stolen childhood. While today's kids juggle piano lessons and video games, children of the 1960s often had only one game: survival. 1. The summer vacation essay was pure imagination. And those same children who worked so hard faced another quiet pain each fall. Teachers cheerfully asked, "Write an essay, what I did last summer?" For middle-class kids, the answers were easy. Trips to Florida beaches, summer camps in California, even Disneyland, which opened in 1955. But for poor kids in Appalachia or Ohio, summer meant cutting grass, picking cotton, or babysitting all day. There was no trip to write about, so they made things up. I visited relatives. I went fishing at the lake. The words looked innocent, but behind them was bitterness. Summer break was no different from any other day, just hotter and filled with chores. That was the silent shock of poverty in the classroom. It wasn't revealed only by old clothes, but by the emptiness on the page. While classmates bragged about distant adventures, poor kids had only imagination to fill the gap. And that memory of a made-up summer essay became a scar that stayed for life. We have just traveled back to 1960s America, a nation poor but resilient, where even the smallest details defined an entire childhood. What about you? Did you ever bathe in a zinc tub, stuff cardboard into your shoes, or write a summer essay filled only with imagination? Share your memories in the comments, because your story might also be the story of a whole generation. And if you love journeys of nostalgia like this one, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. There are many more stories, many more pieces of old America waiting for us to revisit together.